George Duah and Awurama's love story was one of raw devotion, yet filled with anguish. George, a university graduate, had been unable to secure a job despite his endless applications. He spent his days crafting letters of appeal to employers, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. What he lacked in wealth, however, he more than made up for in love. His heart was entirely devoted to Awurama, the young woman who had captured his soul. Awurama loved George deeply, but their love had an unyielding adversary: her mother, Auntie Frema. Auntie Frema was a stern and pragmatic woman who believed love alone could not sustain a family. Her sharp tongue and unyielding disapproval of George cut through Awurama's heart daily. "Awurama," Auntie Frema said one night, her voice cold as steel, "this boy you're wasting your time with, what does he have to offer you? Can love pay the rent? Can love buy food? Open your eyes, my daughter. You're young, beautiful, and smart. You deserve a man who can take care of you, not one who will drag you into poverty." "But Mama, George is a good man. He's just going through a tough time. I know he'll find a job soon," Awurama replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Tough time? That boy has been going through tough times for years. Stop deceiving yourself. A poor man cannot build a home. Let me tell you, Awurama, there is no pride in marrying a man who will make you struggle every single day." Despite her mother's harsh words, Awurama continued to stand by George. She worked at a small roadside stand every night, frying eggs and selling indomie to the locals. She would save every CD she earned, often slipping some into George's pocket when he wasn't looking. One of her regular customers was a man named Asamoah. Handsome, wealthy, and confident, Asamoah always tipped generously when he visited her stand. "Awurama," he would say with a charming smile, "I admire how hard-working you are. A woman like you deserves more in life." At first, Awurama dismissed Asamoah's compliments as mere kindness, but his visits became more frequent and his tips grew larger. He even started bringing her small gifts: perfumes, handbags, and occasionally an envelope of cash. One evening, Awurama decided to confide in her mother. "Mama, there's this man, Asamoah, who keeps coming to my stand. He's nice and always tips me generously. I think he might be interested in me." Auntie Frema's eyes gleamed with opportunity. "Now that's a man who knows how to take care of a woman. Forget about that George boy. Asamoah is your future. Can't you see how he values you? Marry a man who will lift you up, not one who will drag you down." Awurama's heart broke as her mother spoke. She knew Auntie Frema was relentless and would never accept George. But how could she turn her back on the man she truly loved? That night, as George held her hand under the dim light of her indomie stand, he noticed the tears welling in her eyes. "Awurama, what's wrong?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "George, what if I'm not enough to carry us both through this? Mama wants me to leave you, to be with someone else." George's heart sank, but he gripped her hand tightly. "Awurama, I may be poor now, but I promise you, I will never stop fighting for us. I don't need riches to prove my love to you." Awurama nodded, but the weight of her mother's words hung heavy in her heart. Could their love truly survive the storm that Auntie Frema and life itself had unleashed upon them? Asamoah's wealth was like a storm sweeping through Awurama's modest life. As a gold miner, his earnings were immense, and he didn't hold back when it came to lavishing both Awurama and her mother, Auntie Frema, with gifts. Expensive clothes, exotic perfumes, fine jewelry, and even cash became regular offerings. Auntie Frema, who had already despised George Duah, now fully embraced Asamoah as her daughter's savior. "Awurama," Auntie Frema would say, while admiring a new handbag from Asamoah, "this is the kind of man who deserves you. Look at what he can do for us. A man like Asamoah brings pride to the family, not shame like that jobless George. I warned you before. Poverty is a curse, and it's not one we will carry in this house." Awurama felt torn. On one hand, her heart ached for George, who remained steadfast in his love despite her mother's humiliations. On the other hand, Asamoah's wealth and charm slowly began to sway her. It wasn't just the material gifts, but also the promise of stability that drew her in. The seed of doubt Auntie Frema had planted in her mind began to grow. George, though undeterred, became the constant target of Auntie Frema's wrath. Whenever he came to visit Awurama, her mother would meet him at the gate with insults that cut deeper than any wound. "Duah, how dare you come here again?" Auntie Frema would sneer, standing with her hands on her hips. "Have you no shame? What do you think you're offering my daughter? Your poverty. Leave! You don't belong here." And on some days, her fury boiled over. She would grab a bucket of water and pour it on him, drenching him as he stood silently in humiliation. "Mark my words, George," she spat one day after chasing him from her yard. "Poverty is not just the lack of money, it's the absence of dignity, and I will not have my daughter suffer in shame because of you." George stood there, soaked and trembling, his heart heavy with pain, but his spirit unwilling to give up. Poverty had stolen his chances, but he vowed it would not steal his love. That night, he sat alone in his one-room apartment, staring at the flickering candlelight. The words Auntie Frema had hurled at him echoed in his mind, each one slicing into his pride. "Poverty," he whispered to himself, "is like a disease you didn't choose but must suffer from. It robs you of your voice, your worth, and even the right to dream. And yet, no matter how much it breaks me, I will not stop loving Awurama." But as time passed, Awurama began to withdraw. Asamoah's consistent presence, his wealth, and his promises of a bright future began to win her over. The gifts for her mother didn't just buy Auntie Frema's approval. They became symbols of the life Awurama could have, a life free from struggle. One evening, George came to visit Awurama again, hoping to hear her laughter, to see her smile. But when Auntie Frema saw him, she screamed, "Get out of here, Duah! This is the last time you'll step foot in this house. Awurama has moved on to someone who can actually provide for her. You have nothing to offer but misery." George left that night with a broken heart, the realization sinking in that poverty was not just about lacking money. It was about losing the things that mattered most. George Duah had always held on to the hope that love could withstand even the harshest storms. But that hope was shattered one fateful day when he decided to visit Awurama after countless unanswered calls. With a heart heavy with worry, he approached her house, only to witness a sight that froze him in his tracks. There she was, Awurama, the woman he loved more than life itself, locked in an intimate embrace with Asamoah, kissing and laughing in the courtyard of her mother's home. The betrayal hit George like a thunderbolt, but summoning the last shred of courage, he approached them. "Awurama, how could you? After everything we've been through." His voice cracked with pain as he stood there, vulnerable and trembling. Awurama's response was colder than he could have imagined. Her eyes, once filled with love, now glared at him with disdain. "You good-for-nothing man," she spat, her words slicing through him like a blade. Do you think I have time to waste on someone like you? I'm tired of waiting for you to get your life together. If you want a woman like me, go and get money first. Until then, stay out of my life." Her words left George speechless, but the final blow came from Auntie Frema. "George, haven't I warned you enough? Leave my daughter alone. You're a curse, a parasite, dragging her down. Let her live in peace with a real man who can provide for her. Get out of here before I call the neighbors to throw you out." Tears streamed down George's face as he turned away, his heart broken beyond repair. The rejection from the woman he loved and the humiliation in front of her mother burned like fire in his soul. That night, George made a decision. He would leave everything behind and move to Accra, seeking a new beginning. Life in Accra was no easier. George found himself in the bustling chaos of the city, penniless and homeless. He slept on benches at lorry stations, ate leftovers from street vendors, and bathed in public washrooms. The city seemed determined to break him, but he refused to surrender. Driven by sheer will, he sought work wherever he could find it. Eventually, he landed a job as a trotro mate, assisting drivers on Accra's chaotic roads. The work was grueling, shouting out destinations in the scorching sun, enduring insults from impatient passengers, and barely making enough to eat. But George saw this as an opportunity, a stepping stone to something greater. He worked tirelessly, saving every CD he could. He studied the drivers, learning the routes and the mechanics of the vehicles, dreaming of the day he could sit behind the wheel. Months turned into years, and George's determination began to pay off. One day, the driver he worked with fell ill and entrusted George to take over temporarily. It was a small moment, but for George, it was monumental. He drove the trotro with precision and care, earning the respect of both the passengers and the vehicle owner. Impressed by his dedication and skill, the vehicle owner offered to help George obtain a driver's license. With his newfound qualification, George transitioned from a trotro mate to a full-time driver. Though the work was still challenging, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't known in years. After years of struggle, George managed to save enough money to buy a second-hand taxi. The day he received the keys to his own car, he stood beside it, tears of joy streaming down his face. For the first time in his life, he felt like he'd reclaimed his dignity. George was no longer a man defined by poverty. He was a man who had fought against the odds and won. It was an ordinary day in George Duah's life as a taxi driver. Navigating through the busy streets of Accra, he picked up passengers from different walks of life. Little did he know that one passenger would change his life forever. The man had hurriedly entered the taxi and seemed preoccupied with a phone call that left him visibly shaken. When they reached his destination, he rushed out of the car in desperation, leaving behind a heavy black bag. George initially thought nothing of it, but as the hours passed and the man didn't call back, curiosity got the better of him. He cautiously opened the bag and was stunned by its contents. Bundles of crisp cash, neatly arranged enough to make him question if fate had finally smiled on him. How can a man leave such an amount of money in a car? George murmured to himself, staring at the bag in disbelief. For a brief moment, the weight of his struggles flashed before him, the nights he slept on benches, the days he went hungry, the humiliation he endured from Auntie Frema. That money could change everything. But George shook his head. His conscience was clear. "No amount of money is worth my integrity," he said firmly. However, the question of how to return the money haunted him. The man had not left any contact details, and George had no way of tracing him. After thinking it over, he drove to the Nima police station and handed the bag over to the officers. "Officer, a passenger left this in my car," George explained. "I don't know who he is, but I'm sure he'll come looking for it." The officers commended him for his honesty, took his details, and assured him that they would do their best to locate the owner. Days turned into a week, and George heard nothing. But one evening, while scrolling through his phone, he saw a video circulating on social media. The man was explaining his ordeal, pleading for help to locate the taxi driver who had his money. George immediately recognized him. Without hesitation, he dialed the number shared in the video. "Hello, sir. My name is George Duah. I'm the taxi driver who found your bag of money. It's safe and with the police at Nima station." The man was overwhelmed with relief. "Are you serious? My God! I've been looking everywhere for you. I can't believe there are still people like you in this world. Thank you so much." The following day, George accompanied the man to the police station, where the money was safely retrieved. The man, a wealthy businessman named Mr. Asiedu, expressed his gratitude profusely. However, he left without offering George any reward. While most people would have been disappointed, George simply smiled. "I did the right thing, and that's enough," he thought to himself. 2 weeks later, George received an unexpected call from Mr. Asiedu, inviting him to his home. When George arrived, he was astonished by the grandeur of the mansion. Mr. Asiedu welcomed him warmly and thanked him again. "You don't understand how much that money meant to me. I was transporting it for a crucial business deal," he explained. As they talked, Mr. Asiedu became curious about George's background. "Tell me, George, what's your story? You don't seem like an ordinary taxi driver." George hesitated for a moment before replying. "I'm a university graduate, sir, with a degree in accounting. But after years of job hunting with no success, I had to turn to taxi driving to survive." Mr. Asiedu leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "A graduate accountant driving a taxi," he said, almost to himself. "George, people like you are rare. Not just honest, but hard-working and resilient. How would you feel about working for me? I own several businesses, and I could use someone with your qualifications." George's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, I would be honored," he stammered, struggling to contain his emotions. From that moment on, George's life began to change. Mr. Asiedu hired him as an accountant in his company, providing him with a decent salary and opportunities for growth. George moved out of his tiny room and into a more comfortable apartment. Though life had tested him with hardship and heartbreak, his honesty and perseverance had opened a door to a brighter future. As he reflected on his journey, George realized that integrity, even in the face of poverty, was his greatest wealth. Life had finally smiled on George Duah. With the help of Mr. Asiedu, he had climbed from the depths of poverty to the heights of success. His new job as an accountant in one of Mr. Asiedu's businesses provided him not only financial security, but a sense of pride and fulfillment. Over the years, Duah became a wealthy man, owning a fleet of cars and several plots of land. In his hometown, he began constructing a magnificent mansion, a testament to how far he had come. While Duah's life flourished, Awurama's world was falling apart. Asamoah, the man she had chosen over Duah, had run into trouble with the law. His illegal mining activities, which had once funded his lavish lifestyle, caught the government's attention. His excavators were seized and his assets frozen. Asamoah lost everything, leaving Awurama stranded. Their relationship, built on wealth and convenience, crumbled under the weight of his misfortunes. One day, while gossiping with neighbors, Awurama overheard whispers about Duah's success and his mansion under construction. Her heart skipped a beat. The man she had humiliated and abandoned was now living the life she had always dreamed of. That evening, she sat with her mother, Auntie Frema, and shared what she had heard. "Mama," Awurama began, her voice trembling, "Duah, he's rich now. They say he's building a mansion in our hometown." Auntie Frema's eyes widened with interest. "Are you sure? Duah? That poor boy?" She chuckled nervously, but when she saw the seriousness on Awurama's face, her tone changed. "If that's true, my daughter, you have to act fast. Go to him. Apologize. A man like that, he still loves you. The fact that he hasn't married yet proves it. Don't let this opportunity slip away." Awurama hesitated. The memory of how she had treated Duah, the insults and the betrayal, haunted her, but her mother's words ignited a spark of hope. The next morning, she learned that Duah would be visiting his building site and decided to confront him. When Duah arrived at the site, inspecting the work being done on his grand mansion, he heard someone call his name. He turned and saw Awurama running toward him, her face full of regret and desperation. "George," she said, panting, "please, please, hear me out." Her voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. "I made a terrible mistake. I was blinded by money, by what I thought was a better life. But I've realized now that I should never have left you. Please forgive me." Duah's face remained unreadable. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the woman who had once been his whole world. The memories of the pain she caused him flooded back, the insults, the rejection, the humiliation, but so did the love they once shared. "Awurama," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm, "what you did hurt me in ways I can't even describe. But life has taught me that holding on to anger only weighs you down. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were." Awurama fell to her knees, clutching his hands. "George, I'll do anything to prove to you that I've changed. Please, just give me one more chance." News of the encounter quickly spread throughout the town. People mocked Duah, calling him a fool for even speaking to Awurama again. "How can he take back the woman who abandoned him when he had nothing?" they jeered. "After all he went through because of her mother, he's still willing to forgive." Auntie Frema, however, was thrilled when she heard Duah had forgiven her daughter. She visited him personally to express her gratitude. "Duah," she began, her tone unusually soft, "I know I wronged you. I said terrible things to you, and I'll never be able to take them back. But thank you for forgiving Awurama. It means the world to me." Duah nodded politely, but remained distant. He had come to terms with his past, but the scars Auntie Frema and Awurama left behind were not so easily erased. He chose to focus on his future, ignoring the ridicule of the townsfolk. "Let them laugh," Duah told himself one evening as he stood in front of his mansion, now near completion. "I don't live my life to please anyone. Forgiveness is for my peace, not theirs." A few months after Duah had forgiven Awurama, she began pressing him for something more, a reconciliation that would culminate in marriage. She visited him regularly, bringing meals and speaking of their past, as if trying to rekindle the love they once shared. Duah remained polite but distant, unsure whether her motives were genuine or rooted in regret over her lost opportunity with Asamoah. "George," Awurama pleaded one evening at his mansion construction site, "I know I hurt you deeply, but I've changed. I've seen how kind and forgiving you are, and I know now that you're the man I should have been with all along. Please, give me the honor of becoming your wife." Duah, though hesitant, found himself conflicted. Deep down, he still harbored feelings for Awurama, despite everything she had done. However, he couldn't ignore the echoes of betrayal that haunted his heart. When Awurama's persistence didn't seem to move him, Auntie Frema stepped in. She visited Duah one afternoon and spoke with an unusually warm tone. "George, my son," she began, her voice coated in sweetness. "You're a good man. My daughter sees that now. Awurama made mistakes, but who hasn't? She loves you, George, and she will make a good wife. It's time to let the past go and look to the future. Marry her, and together you can build a beautiful life." Duah nodded quietly but gave no firm answer. That evening, Auntie Frema sat Awurama down and spoke candidly. "Listen to me, my daughter," she said, her eyes sharp with calculation. "If George agrees to marry you, it's not just about love. It's about security. That mansion he's building, it will one day be yours. And if you have a wedding, you'll gain even more. Money, gifts, property. And let me tell you, if he ever tries to divorce you, you'll still come out on top. Men like him will do anything to avoid shame." Awurama listened intently, her mother's words filling her with renewed determination. She redoubled her efforts, doing everything she could to win Duah's trust and affection. Over time, her persistence began to wear down his defenses, and Duah made a decision that shocked everyone. He told his family he wanted to marry Awurama. The announcement caused an uproar. His family, who had supported him through his darkest days, couldn't understand his choice. "George," his elder sister said during a family meeting, "how can you marry the same woman who abandoned you for another man, after everything she and her mother put you through?" Duah sighed, his voice calm but firm. "I know what you're all thinking, and I understand. But I still love her. People make mistakes, and I believe in second chances. I've chosen to forgive her, and I want to build a life with her." His younger brother shook his head in disbelief. "But what about her motives, George? Are you sure she loves you, or does she love your success?" Duah paused, the question lingering in the air. "I've thought about that," he admitted. "But I've also realized that holding on to resentment will only keep me stuck in the past. I want to move forward, and I believe Awurama deserves a chance to prove herself." Despite their reservations, his family reluctantly agreed to support his decision. A date was set for the wedding, and preparations began in earnest. Meanwhile, whispers spread throughout the town, with many ridiculing Duah for what they saw as a foolish choice. "After all that woman did to him, he's still going to marry her. He's either too kind or too blind," people muttered, but Duah paid no attention to the gossip. For him, this was about reclaiming his narrative, a chance to show that forgiveness and love could prevail, even in the face of betrayal. As the wedding day approached, Auntie Frema couldn't hide her glee. "This is exactly what I wanted for you, my daughter," she told Awurama. "Marrying Duah means you'll never have to struggle again. Make sure you keep your hold on him." Awurama smiled, but deep inside, she wondered if Duah truly trusted her, or if this was merely his way of closing a painful chapter in his life. Only time would tell if their marriage would be built on love, or if the wounds of the past would eventually resurface. The day of the wedding was finally here, a day Awurama had been dreaming of ever since Duah forgave her and agreed to marry her. The atmosphere was filled with excitement as friends, family, and well-wishers gathered at the beautifully decorated venue. The place was alive with vibrant colors, soft music, and the hum of chatter as everyone anticipated the union of George Duah and Awurama. Awurama, glowing with happiness, sat in front of a mirror as the makeup artist worked her magic. Her wedding gown was breathtaking, a masterpiece of lace and pearls that made her look like a queen. Her friends surrounded her, offering words of encouragement and compliments. "You're the most beautiful bride we've ever seen, Awurama," one of her bridesmaids said, adjusting her veil. Awurama blushed, her heart swelling with joy. "Thank you," she said softly, glancing at her reflection. "I just hope George feels the same way when he sees me." Meanwhile, Duah was at his house, getting dressed in his elegant suit. As he stood in front of the mirror, his face betrayed no excitement or joy. His best man, sensing his unease, asked, "Duah, you okay? You've been quiet all morning." Duah gave a faint smile. "I'm fine, just nervous, I guess." As the hours ticked by, Duah suddenly grabbed his car keys. "I need to meet someone quickly. I'll be back before the ceremony starts," he said. "Now?" his best man asked, confused. "The wedding is about to begin, Duah. You don't have much time." "I'll be quick," Duah assured him as he stepped out and drove away. Back at the venue, the preparations were in full swing. Guests were seated, and both families sat on opposite sides, chatting and waiting patiently. Food and drinks were being served. Photographers were busy capturing every moment. And the bridal party was ready to make their entrance. Auntie Frema, dressed in her finest attire, moved around, greeting guests and basking in the glory of the occasion. But as time went by, there was still no sign of Duah. Awurama, now fully dressed and radiant in her gown, began to grow anxious. She called him, but his phone rang without an answer. Her bridesmaids tried to calm her down, assuring her he was probably stuck in traffic. Minutes turned into hours, and Duah's phone eventually went off completely. Awurama's anxiety turned to desperation. "Where is he?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Her mother, now visibly worried, tried calling Duah herself, but the results were the same. The once lively atmosphere at the venue began to shift. Guests whispered among themselves, confusion and concern written on their faces. Auntie Frema, trying to keep her composure, approached Awurama. "He'll be here," she said firmly, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "He wouldn't dare humiliate us like this." But as more time passed, it became clear that Duah wasn't coming. Awurama, unable to hold back her emotions any longer, broke down in tears. Her carefully applied makeup was ruined as sobs racked her body. "How could he do this to me?" she cried. "After everything, after all the forgiveness and promises, how could he betray me like this?" Her friends and family surrounded her, trying to console her, but the pain of betrayal was too much to bear. The money spent on the wedding, the effort put into planning, the public humiliation, everything came crashing down on her at once. Auntie Frema, normally so confident and outspoken, sat quietly in disbelief. Her carefully crafted plan to secure her daughter's future had crumbled before her eyes. She couldn't even look the guests in the eye as they began to leave one by one, shaking their heads in pity and disdain. As the day turned to evening, Awurama sat in her wedding gown, staring blankly at nothing. Her tears had dried, but the weight of disappointment remained heavy. Her dreams of a new life with Duah were shattered, and she was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. Duah's absence was more than just a betrayal. It was a reminder of how the choices of the past could come back to haunt you in the most unexpected ways. And while Awurama grappled with the pain of being abandoned, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Why had Duah disappeared on his wedding day? Do you agree or disagree with what Duah did to Awurama and her mother? Was his public payback justified, or do you believe he should have handled the situation differently? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions in the comment section and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to Ananse Web of Tales for more captivating and thought-provoking stories.